"He's long gone," Lisa said, her voice almost too calm, and for a moment the world seemed to stop around me. I had just asked what time my son's funeral would be, expecting a simple answer, maybe a time to gather the family, a moment to honor him, but instead, her words felt like a cold wall crashing into me. I stood in the living room of my modest suburban home in Springfield, Illinois, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the faint scent of lilies I had bought for the occasion, trying to process what she meant. My heart pounded, yet I forced myself to breathe, clinging to the hope that perhaps she was joking or confused, but deep down, I knew that tone, calm, detached, final, too well. I remembered the countless times I had cared for my family, from packing lunches and driving to soccer games to staying up late nursing my husband when he was ill, always believing that love and dedication would weave us together into an unbreakable family bond. Yet now, as I looked at Lisa, her posture straight, a faint smirk playing at the corner of her lips, I realized that I had been blind to the subtle shifts, the whispers behind closed doors, the quiet rearrangement of roles that slowly edged me out. My mind flashed back to the week leading up to this moment, the missed calls from my son, the mysterious errands Lisa had run, the subtle changes in the family calendar that kept me on the outside, wondering why my presence no longer seemed necessary or welcome. I felt a mixture of sorrow and anger, a bitter cocktail I had never thought I would taste in my own home. I moved closer to the mantel where photographs of my son and our family hung in neat frames, and I traced his smiling face with my finger, remembering the warmth he had brought to all of us and wondering how someone could twist a family into such coldness. The house, once filled with laughter, now felt foreign, each ticking second echoing Lisa's words, each shadow stretching longer than before. And yet, beneath the hurt and shock, a tiny ember of resolve sparked within me. I would not crumble into despair. I would observe, I would plan, and I would reclaim my place, not with anger, but with the quiet dignity that had always defined me. This was my home, my family, and even if betrayal had entered these walls, I would meet it with clarity, with patience, and with the unwavering belief that truth eventually reveals itself. As I stepped toward the kitchen, preparing a cup of tea to steady my racing thoughts, I realized that the days ahead would demand more than grief. They would demand insight, strategy, and courage, and I was determined to face them head-on, proving to myself, and perhaps to Lisa, that age and experience carried power beyond what she could see in her calculated calm. After taking a deep breath and letting the initial shock settle, Susan moved through the quiet rooms of her home, noticing the small details she had never paid attention to before, the careful placement of furniture that seemed to favor someone else's presence, the muted tones of the curtains that had been chosen not for warmth but for control, and she realized that this house, which had once felt like a safe haven, was now a stage where subtle manipulations played out each day. She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and carried it to the window, staring out at the neatly trimmed lawn where the autumn leaves had begun to gather, and she reflected on the chain of events that had brought her to this point, the small overlooked signs, the polite deflections, the casual remarks that now seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Memories of her son flooded back, the laughter they shared during Sunday brunches, the way he would help her in the garden, the quiet evenings spent reading together, and she felt a pang of longing for those simple, unspoiled moments, realizing that in her efforts to keep the family together she had not noticed how fragile those bonds had become. Determined to regain clarity, Susan began to make notes, not on paper, but in her mind, cataloging incidents, conversations, and inconsistencies, forming a quiet, strategic map of the dynamics that governed her household. She recalled the family dinners when she had noticed Lisa steering conversations away from her, subtly undermining her authority without causing confrontation, and she began to see the pattern, the calculated effort to isolate her and shape the family narrative in a way that diminished her voice and presence. Instead of anger, Susan felt a calm resolve, understanding that her response would have to be measured and intelligent, an approach that allowed her to maintain dignity, while also protecting her position within the family. She considered the upcoming week, the social gatherings, the casual visits from neighbors, the appointments she would keep, all potential moments to observe, to gather more insight, and to demonstrate quietly that she was not to be disregarded. Susan remembered the small victories of her past, how patience and careful planning had allowed her to navigate challenges, and she realized that she could employ the same principles now, taking time to understand motivations, to identify alliances, and to prepare herself for the conversations that would inevitably come. As she walked to the kitchen to refill her tea, she reflected on the subtle art of observation, how attention to detail, the slight hesitation in a voice, the way someone avoided eye contact, could reveal intentions, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that she had the experience, the insight, and the patience to manage the situation with wisdom and composure. Susan also began to think about her own needs, the importance of self-care in this difficult time, and how maintaining routines and small comforts could strengthen her resolve, allowing her to face challenges without compromising her sense of self. She made a mental plan to document interactions, to keep track of conversations, and to notice patterns, all while maintaining a calm exterior, presenting herself as composed and unaffected, which she knew would disarm attempts at manipulation. With each passing moment, Susan felt her confidence growing, a quiet assurance that she could navigate the intricate web of family dynamics without losing sight of who she was and the principles she had always upheld. She thought about the legacy of her values, the integrity she had modeled for her children and for the family, and she recognized that even in the presence of betrayal, she had the power to influence outcomes through patience, observation, and intelligent action, reinforcing that dignity and clarity were her most effective tools. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the living room floor, Susan felt a sense of control returning, a calm understanding that while she could not undo the past, she could shape her response and maintain her place in the family with strength and subtle authority, preparing for the conversations and decisions that lay ahead with a composed mind and a steady heart. The following morning, Susan awoke to the gentle light filtering through the blinds, the soft rustle of leaves outside her window providing a quiet contrast to the turbulence in her mind. She dressed slowly, choosing a sweater in a warm shade of cream that reminded her of cozy family dinners before tensions had begun to creep into their home. Moving to the kitchen, she set the kettle on the stove and arranged the breakfast table with care, placing a small vase of fresh daisies she had picked from the garden. As the water began to boil, she reflected on the previous evening, retracing each conversation, each glance, each subtle shift in tone that had revealed layers of intention and careful maneuvering within her household. Susan made a mental note to observe interactions at breakfast, a time when true attitudes often surfaced unguarded, and she reminded herself to remain calm, poised, and attentive. When Lisa entered the kitchen, humming softly as she carried a tray of fruit, Susan offered a courteous smile, her demeanor composed and welcoming, while her mind quietly catalogued every detail. The tilt of the head, the pause before speaking, the way she arranged the plates on the table. They exchanged polite words about the weather and the upcoming week, small talk that served as both a shield and a test of character, and Susan sensed the undercurrent of tension that Lisa had woven skillfully. Susan poured herself a cup of coffee and took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle her nerves, appreciating that observation and patience could be more powerful than confrontation. She considered inviting her neighbors for a casual afternoon visit, an opportunity to reaffirm her position in the community, to reinforce bonds outside the immediate household, and to gather additional insight into the subtle dynamics at play. Thoughts of her son surfaced again, and she allowed herself a moment to feel the depth of her loss, acknowledging that grief and resolve could coexist, fueling both empathy and determination. As she cleared the breakfast dishes and wiped the counter with deliberate care, she noticed the slight misalignment of a framed photo on the wall, a minor detail that seemed symbolic of the larger shifts she had been perceiving, reminding her that small things often held meaningful insights. Susan resolved to continue documenting these observations quietly, using her knowledge and understanding of the household patterns to navigate the days ahead with clarity. She planned her schedule with precision, allotting time for reflection, for maintaining routines, and for engaging with family members in a manner that would preserve her dignity while asserting her presence. By mid-morning, Susan felt a sense of controlled purpose, knowing that through patience, attentiveness, and thoughtful action, she could influence outcomes, maintain respect, and subtly guide interactions toward fairness and recognition of her contributions. The day unfolded with measured steps, conversations approached with tact, and a consistent calm that reflected both experience and wisdom, reminding her that presence and observation were among the most potent tools in maintaining equilibrium within her home and reinforcing the respect she deserved. By late afternoon, Susan found herself in the sunroom, the soft glow of the setting sun casting warm light across the shelves lined with family photographs and mementos. She ran her fingers over the spines of books she had collected over the years, each one a reminder of her knowledge and the life she had built with care and intention. Lisa passed by the room briefly, offering a polite nod that Susan returned with a calm smile, her demeanor composed while she carefully noted the subtle shifts in tone and posture that often revealed underlying intentions. Susan reflected on the moments they shared over tea and conversation earlier, analyzing the choices of words, the pauses, the gentle redirections, and she realized that patience and observation remained her strongest allies in navigating these complex interactions. She turned her attention to the garden visible through the window, noticing how the late blooms persisted despite the approaching chill, a quiet testament to resilience, and she drew a parallel to her own determination to maintain strength and dignity amid subtle familial tensions. As she organized a small tray with a teapot and cups, preparing for an anticipated visit from her neighbor, she considered how these visits could serve multiple purposes: nurturing connections outside the immediate family, reinforcing her social presence, and providing additional perspective on the dynamics at play within her household. Susan thought carefully about the interaction she would initiate, choosing topics that encouraged openness while remaining non-confrontational, allowing her to observe responses and gather insight without creating unnecessary conflict. Each detail she noticed, from the choice of floral arrangements to the careful arrangement of chairs, contributed to a larger understanding of the patterns influencing daily life, and she cataloged these observations mentally, reinforcing her awareness of subtle shifts in tone, behavior, and influence. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth center her focus, appreciating that calm, deliberate actions could achieve more than impulsive responses, and that maintaining composure would reinforce her presence in the family and community. With the sun descending and shadows lengthening across the room, Susan felt a quiet sense of control returning, a steady reassurance that through attention, strategy, and the maintenance of dignity, she could navigate the upcoming days with insight, patience, and strength, turning even small moments into opportunities to observe, understand, and influence the environment around her. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Susan prepared for the small gathering she had planned with her neighbor, choosing a light cardigan and arranging the living room with thoughtful attention to detail. She placed a few carefully selected candles on the mantel and adjusted the throw pillows to create a welcoming space that reflected both warmth and order. The soft chime of the doorbell announced her visitor, and Susan greeted her with a composed smile, ushering her inside and offering a cup of freshly brewed tea. As they settled into comfortable chairs near the window, the conversation flowed easily at first, touching on everyday matters, local news, and seasonal changes, but Susan skillfully steered the discussion toward topics that would provide subtle insights into the ways others viewed household dynamics and relationships, all while maintaining a gracious and attentive demeanor. She listened closely, noting small details: the tone of voice, the emphasis on particular words, the way gestures accompanied speech, understanding that these nuances often revealed deeper truths about people and their observations. While the neighbor spoke, Susan reflected on the patterns she had noticed at home, comparing them to her neighbor's remarks, and she found reassurance in recognizing consistencies that confirmed her previous perceptions. She observed how her presence and the careful curation of her environment elicited respect and attentiveness, reinforcing the sense that she maintained control not through force, but through composure, knowledge, and thoughtful action. The afternoon passed with measured ease, and when her neighbor left, Susan tidied the space with deliberate care, taking a moment to appreciate how small, intentional gestures could influence atmosphere and perception. Turning toward the family photographs lining the shelves, she thought again of her son, allowing herself a quiet, reflective moment to acknowledge the depth of her loss while simultaneously drawing strength from her enduring connection to him and to the values he represented. Susan made a mental note to continue using observation, attentiveness, and patience as tools in navigating household interactions, understanding that influence often comes from subtlety rather than overt action, and that dignity, consistency, and careful attention to detail could shift perspectives and reinforce her role within the family. As twilight deepened and the first stars appeared in the sky, she took a brief walk in the garden, noting the resilient late blooms and the crisp scent of evening air, feeling a renewed sense of calm and purpose. She planned the coming days meticulously, considering who she would engage with, what conversations she would initiate, and how she would maintain composure while gathering information, always mindful of the subtle currents shaping the household atmosphere. Each step, each observation, Each carefully measured interaction reinforced her growing confidence, reminding her that even in moments of quiet solitude, her awareness and presence held significant influence. Susan returned inside with a sense of quiet accomplishment, reassured that through deliberate, thoughtful, and measured actions, she could maintain her position, protect her dignity, and navigate the complexities of her family relationships with insight, patience, and unwavering composure, ensuring that the subtle power of observation and the strength of character would guide her through the challenging days ahead. The next morning, Susan awoke with the sun spilling gently across the bedroom floor, casting long warm beams that seemed to bring both comfort and clarity. She dressed deliberately, choosing a light blue cardigan over a crisp white blouse, a combination that made her feel composed and ready to face the day with focus. In the kitchen, she arranged a simple breakfast, carefully placing slices of whole grain toast, fresh fruit, and a pot of her favorite chamomile tea, preparing both sustenance and a sense of ritual that grounded her. As she moved about, she reflected on the preceding days, the careful observations she had made, the subtle patterns she had begun to understand, and she felt a quiet assurance in her ability to navigate these complicated household dynamics. Susan considered the conversation she would have over the course of the day, the points she wanted to gently probe, and the ways in which she could reinforce her presence and perspective without overt confrontation. Each cup of tea she poured, each plate she set became an exercise in mindfulness, a means to center herself while remaining alert to the nuances of body language, tone, and expression that often conveyed more than words alone. By mid-morning, Susan decided to step into the garden for a brief walk, enjoying the crisp scent of autumn leaves and the cool air brushing against her cheeks, allowing herself a moment of reflection and calm before returning to the intricate social dynamics within the house. She noted the resilience of the late-season flowers, how they endured despite the changing temperatures, and drew a parallel to her own determination to remain poised, observant, and steadfast in the face of challenges within her family. As she returned inside, Lisa entered the room with a stack of mail, casually commenting on errands and upcoming appointments, and Susan offered a composed response, her tone neutral yet attentive, using the conversation to assess priorities, intentions, and potential shifts in household focus. Every interaction, no matter how seemingly mundane, provided Susan with additional information, reinforcing her mental map of relationships, responsibilities, and unspoken rules that govern daily life. By late morning, she moved to the living room, reviewing photographs and family albums, taking note of how subtle arrangements reflected priorities and emotional investments, and she felt a renewed clarity about the values, respect, and recognition she intended to maintain within the household. As the day progressed, Susan engaged in various activities, from organizing documents to making notes about schedules, all performed with a calm focus that reinforced her authority and demonstrated her continued presence and influence. Conversations with neighbors and brief calls from extended family members provided further context, allowing her to measure how household dynamics aligned with broader social observations. She reflected on her son, the warmth he had brought to family life, and how honoring his memory could guide her interactions with care, thoughtfulness, and insight, maintaining both emotional authenticity and strategic clarity. By afternoon, she reviewed her plan for upcoming gatherings, identifying opportunities to assert subtle guidance, support family cohesion, and maintain her dignity while observing behaviors and collecting insights. Susan considered the balance between patience and action, recognizing that measured responses, grounded in observation and understanding, could gradually restore equilibrium and respect within the family, and she prepared herself to navigate these moments with wisdom and composure. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the home, and Susan took a quiet pause to reflect on the lessons of the day, appreciating the strength, resilience, and thoughtful strategy she had cultivated. In this moment, she felt both grounded and empowered, knowing that through careful observation, deliberate action, and unwavering dignity, she could manage the intricate web of relationships around her, ensuring that the subtle influence of her presence continued to shape the household in meaningful ways, maintaining her role, reinforcing her authority, and preparing for the days ahead with clarity, patience, and quiet confidence. As the day wore on, Susan continued her careful observations, moving through the house with a sense of purpose and deliberate calm. She noticed how the sunlight shifted across the living room floor, highlighting the edges of family photographs and small heirlooms, each detail subtly reinforcing the story of her family, both what was remembered and what had been overlooked. With a quiet cup of tea in hand, she seated herself near the window and reflected on the subtle interactions she had witnessed over the past few days, from the slight hesitations in Lisa's speech to the careful arrangements of furniture that seemed designed to assert influence. Susan considered the upcoming evening, when the extended family would arrive for a small gathering, and she planned her approach with careful attention to timing, tone, and presence, understanding that every word and gesture could convey strength, dignity, and awareness without confrontation. She reviewed her mental notes, cataloging behaviors, statements, and patterns that revealed intentions and priorities, all while maintaining an exterior of calm composure, allowing her to observe without revealing the full depth of her understanding. As she arranged fresh flowers in a simple vase on the dining table, she thought about the symbolism of these small actions, how attention to detail could subtly convey care, organization, and stability, reinforcing her position within the household and the respect she deserved. Later, as Lisa moved about the kitchen, preparing for the arrival of guests, Susan engaged in polite conversation, listening attentively, asking measured questions, and noting how responses aligned or conflicted with prior observations. She observed the nuances of tone, posture, and timing, recognizing the small cues that often carried the greatest significance. By mid-afternoon, Susan took a moment to retreat to her sunroom, reflecting on her long-term strategy for maintaining influence, preserving dignity, and asserting her presence in ways that were both effective and graceful. She reviewed upcoming social interactions, identifying moments to speak, to listen, and to act in alignment with her understanding of household dynamics, all while maintaining a consistent calm that allowed her to guide outcomes subtly. In the quiet moments before the gathering, she wandered through the garden, noting how resilient late-season flowers continued to bloom despite cooler temperatures, drawing a parallel to her own endurance, patience, and unwavering focus. She considered how patience and careful planning had always been her allies, allowing her to navigate complex family situations with insight and strategic grace. As guests began to arrive, Susan welcomed each with warmth, measured attention, and a composed presence, immediately noticing subtle shifts in energy and attention that reflected relationships, alliances, and tensions. She engaged in conversation with tact, allowing others to share freely while she observed quietly, noting patterns of behavior, choice of words, and social positioning, all of which added to her growing understanding of household dynamics. The evening unfolded with grace, each interaction reinforcing her awareness, confidence, and strategic insight, reminding her that influence often came from observation, composure, and careful engagement rather than overt action. By the end of the gathering, Susan felt a quiet satisfaction, recognizing that she had maintained her dignity, asserted her presence, and reinforced her role through intelligence, patience, and subtle action, all while preparing for the continuing navigation of complex family relationships in the days ahead. As the evening light softened, Susan found herself seated once again in the sunroom, the calm stillness of the house offering a moment to reflect on the events that had unfolded over the past several days. She sipped slowly from her cup of tea, letting the warmth settle her mind while her eyes traced the familiar lines of the room, from the framed family photographs to the small collections of trinkets that marked years of shared memories. Each object seemed to tell a story, reminding her of the care and attention she had invested in the family home, the effort she had made to nurture both relationships and the physical space around her. Her thoughts drifted to the interactions earlier in the day, how she had observed subtle shifts in tone, posture, and word choice, all of which offered insights into intentions, priorities, and underlying tensions. Susan noted the ways Lisa maneuvered conversation, the careful positioning of herself during discussions, and the delicate ways in which she influenced others without overtly asserting control. These observations reinforced Susan's understanding of the dynamics within her household and reminded her of the importance of patience, attentiveness, and strategic engagement. She made mental notes of the small details that mattered, the order in which people were greeted, the placement of items on tables, and the nuances in responses to seemingly casual questions. Each detail was part of a larger picture, one that Susan now approached with clarity and careful consideration, knowing that awareness and composure were her most effective tools in maintaining influence and presence. As she prepared a light dinner for herself, she reflected on how daily routines, Small gestures and thoughtful preparation could reinforce both dignity and respect, providing a framework within which she could continue to observe and guide interactions without confrontation. Susan considered the balance between maintaining personal boundaries and engaging constructively, recognizing that demonstrating consistency, warmth, and attentiveness allowed her to assert her role subtly while cultivating trust and connection. She reviewed plans for the coming week, noting family gatherings, appointments, and informal visits, and mapped how each situation could be approached with a combination of observation, engagement, and measured response. Thoughts of her son remained present, inspiring her to act with both kindness and discernment, honoring his memory through thoughtful, considered interactions that reflected the values she had instilled over the years. As night fell, the house quieted, and Susan took a brief walk through the garden, appreciating the soft rustle of leaves and the crisp autumn air, allowing herself a reflective pause to consolidate her observations and prepare mentally for upcoming days. Each step, each moment of awareness, reinforced her sense of agency, reminding her that subtle, consistent, and intelligent action could shape outcomes more effectively than overt confrontation. By the time she returned inside, Susan felt a steady calm, a clear sense of purpose, and a renewed determination to navigate household dynamics with insight, patience, and composure, ensuring that her presence, dignity, and influence remained intact while she continued to observe, learn, and guide the environment around her thoughtfully. As the morning sun filtered softly through the blinds, Susan took a deep breath, feeling the calm that came from a night of reflection and careful observation. She dressed in a light beige sweater and comfortable slacks, choosing attire that allowed her to move freely while maintaining an air of composed presence. In the kitchen, she arranged a small breakfast of oatmeal, fresh berries, and a pot of herbal tea, setting the table with care to create a welcoming atmosphere, not just for herself but for any interactions that might occur during the day. As she sipped her tea, she reflected on the patterns she had observed over the past week, noting how subtle gestures, word choices, and timing revealed intentions and priorities within the household. Susan reviewed her mental notes, cataloging behaviors that had previously seemed inconsequential, but now held significance, understanding that awareness and patience were her most effective tools. She considered the afternoon ahead, when neighbors and extended family would drop by for brief visits, and she mentally prepared strategies for engagement, focusing on careful listening, measured responses, and observing interactions without revealing the full extent of her understanding. Susan moved through the rooms, straightening photographs, adjusting cushions, and attending to small details that reinforced her presence and care, recognizing that these gestures spoke volumes about her role and influence in the home. Each action was deliberate, grounded in the principle that dignity and attentiveness could subtly assert authority and presence more effectively than direct confrontation. As the morning progressed, she received a call from a distant cousin, and she engaged in thoughtful conversation, asking questions that encouraged openness while carefully noting the nuances of tone and word choice, further enhancing her understanding of family dynamics beyond the immediate household. When the doorbell rang for a neighborly visit, Susan greeted her with warmth and composure, guiding the conversation toward topics that allowed for observation and insight, while maintaining a gracious and hospitable demeanor. She noted how the neighbor responded to casual remarks, the subtleties of their expressions, and the timing of their gestures, reinforcing her awareness of the ways in which perceptions and interactions shaped relationships. After the visit, Susan returned to her favorite chair near the window, reflecting on the morning's engagements and integrating these observations into her broader understanding of household and family interactions. She reviewed her plans for upcoming gatherings, considering how to maintain calm, dignity, and subtle influence in each interaction, recognizing that consistent composure, attentiveness, and patience would allow her to guide outcomes thoughtfully. In the quiet of the late morning, Susan stepped outside to the garden, enjoying the crisp autumn air and observing the late blooms that persisted despite the approaching chill, drawing strength from their resilience and using the moment to reinforce her own sense of purpose and calm. By the time she returned inside, she felt a renewed clarity and confidence, assured that through deliberate observation, intelligent action, and the quiet assertion of her presence, she could continue to navigate household dynamics with composure, maintaining respect, dignity, and influence while preparing for the days and interactions ahead with steady determination and thoughtful care.